Lieutenant Riley Beers had been through plenty of high-pressure moments in his 10 years with the U.S. Coast Guard. But today wasn't supposed to be one of them, just a routine patrol over the Pacific. Nothing more. The flight path passed near Picolot Island, a quiet, untouched coral island about 160 miles northeast of Yap. It was the kind of place that almost never had visitors. As Riley nudged the controls, the aircraft drifted smoothly over the empty shoreline. He glanced down at the island's powder-white beach, a thin stretch between the bright ocean and thick trees. Then something shifted, barely noticeable, like a flicker near the edge of the forest. Riley almost ignored it, thinking it was a bird or maybe sunlight bouncing off the leaves. But as they got closer, something else caught his attention. Right at the edge of the sand, huge letters had been scratched into the beach. SOS! "Look at that," Riley shouted, pointing quickly to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Justin Doyle. "That's an SOS. Someone's down there." Justin leaned forward, eyes widening. "That's not just a mark in the sand. Someone's seriously in trouble." Riley eased the chopper into a slower turn, circling back. "Radio it in." "Let's get a rescue team moving, but I want to see exactly what we're dealing with first." Justin was already reaching for the radio while Riley scanned the island again. The movement from earlier came into focus. Now, clearly visible near the middle of the island, were people. "Guys, look at this," Riley said, his voice low, tense. His chest tightened. "There's not supposed to be anyone out here. This island should be empty." As they dropped altitude, Riley's stomach sank. 3 figures stood on the beach, waving with everything they had. Even from the air, their thin frames looked worn down and weak. The way they moved, panicked, urgent, sent chills up Riley's spine. Nearby, a boat was pulled up onto the sand. "God, no," Riley breathed, eyes locked on the scene below. "They look like they've been stuck here forever." The Coast Guard chopper hovered over Picolot Island as Riley and the rest of the crew took in the full picture. Down below, 3 people, a woman and 2 men, were waving with everything they had, clearly desperate to be seen. Their clothes were torn, their bodies thin and worn down. They'd been stranded for a long time. The shock hit Riley hard, but it quickly gave way to urgency. These people needed help, fast. As he brought the helicopter in closer, the full weight of the situation started to sink in. The flat beach offered almost no protection, and the only sign of shelter was a rough little hut tucked in beneath the palm trees. It looked like it had been thrown together from scraps and debris. This wasn't a place anyone could survive for long. "We've got to get them off this island now," Riley said, his voice steady but firm. "They're not going to last much longer." But as he said it, something on the horizon made his stomach twist. The ocean sky, which had been mostly clear, was starting to darken fast. Thick clouds were rolling in, fast and angry, stretching out toward the island and sending sharp gusts of wind that rattled the chopper. Justin noticed it too. "We've got trouble, Riley," he said, checking the radar. "Storms coming in from the southwest, moving quicker than forecasted." Riley's hands tightened on the controls. "How long before it hits us?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Justin checked the screen, adjusting the range. "Maybe 30 minutes, max. If we don't move soon, we're going to be right in the middle of it." He looked over, concerned. "And it's not looking mild." Riley's mind was racing. The castaways needed immediate help, but flying into a storm for a rescue was a risk. The wind was already rough enough to make lowering a winch nearly impossible. The sea below was starting to churn too, ruling out any water landing, and calling in backup helicopters. That wasn't happening in this weather. They were running out of options, fast. "Drop a radio and emergency supplies," Riley ordered quickly. "We need to keep them stable until we can get back here." The crew moved fast, pulling together a package of food, water, a basic medical kit, and a 2-way radio. They wrapped it up tight so it could survive the drop. Riley circled the chopper and brought it to a steady hover above a clear patch of sand. The bundle dropped and hit the ground a short distance from the three castaways, who rushed toward it without hesitation. As they tore open the package, Riley spoke into his headset, his voice tight with concern. "Can you hear us?" A few seconds passed, then a shaky voice crackled through the radio. "We hear you." "Thank you. Please help us." "This is the U.S. Coast Guard," Riley said, trying to keep his tone calm even though his chest felt heavy. "We're here to help." "But there's a big storm moving in. We have to return to base for now. We dropped supplies, food, water, and a medical kit. That should help until we can get back to you." There was a pause, just static. Then the same voice came back, raw and pleading. "No, don't leave us. Please. We've been out here 33 days, eating whatever we could find. Rats, shells. We've been drinking rainwater, but Rita's not doing well. Her blood sugar's really low. Please, we need help." Riley swallowed hard. Guilt settled in like a weight in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, voice tight. "We don't have a choice. The storm's too close. It's not safe to try a rescue right now. But I promise, we'll come back." Wind surged suddenly, hitting the aircraft hard and jolting it slightly. Down below, the castaways staggered, clutching the supplies as the first drops of rain began to fall. The air turned sharp and cold in seconds, and Riley could feel the shift through the controls. "Riley, we've got to move," Justin said urgently. "Visibility's about to drop. If we don't leave now, we won't make it out." Riley froze for a moment, staring down at the three small figures below. They looked even more fragile now, holding onto that supply bundle like it was the only thing keeping them alive. Then, with a deep breath, he pulled the aircraft away. He turned once, looking back as dark clouds rolled in fast, swallowing up the little island until it was barely visible. A moment later, rain hammered down hard, blurring the ocean beneath them. It felt awful, like leaving someone behind in a burning building, but staying would have been reckless. The wind alone would have thrown a rescue line all over the place. Trying to hoist someone up in that weather could have sent them spinning into the sea or slammed into the side of the chopper. The risk wasn't worth the lives it might cost. As they headed back to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, 500 miles from the island, Riley couldn't stop the scene from playing on repeat in his mind. Those desperate faces, the way they waved, the broken voices over the radio. He knew the storm made staying impossible, but that didn't make leaving them feel any easier. It wasn't just about flying into bad weather, it was about walking away from three people who were barely hanging on. The only thing giving him a sliver of peace was knowing they'd dropped enough supplies to help them through the night. More patrols and support choppers were already being lined up for the next morning. Help was on its way, just not fast enough. 3 hours later, their aircraft touched down on base. Rain was now slamming against the airfield windows, the storm finally arriving in full. Riley stepped out of the cockpit and into the cold wind, the rain stinging his face. He knew he wouldn't be sleeping much tonight. Somewhere out there, on that lonely island, three people were bracing through the storm with nothing but scraps and hope. Riley couldn't shake the image of those thin, sunburned figures waving frantically below. He kept wondering how they'd made it through more than a month in those conditions. The voice on the radio had said it all, barely surviving off whatever they could catch, drinking rainwater, and now one of them barely holding on. He tried to picture what each day must have been like. Hot sun, cold nights, hunger, fear. Later, he sat down with the rest of the crew for the debrief. Everyone listened closely as Riley went over the castaways' condition and what they'd seen. Justin shook his head slowly. "I don't know how they're still alive. The heat alone and no steady water source?" Most people wouldn't have lasted a week. Plans were already underway to keep an eye on the island through the night. Helicopters would make passes, dropping more supplies if needed, while the main rescue team prepared for a full recovery at first light. There was no time to waste. The mission was simple now. Get those people off that island as soon as the skies cleared. That night, Riley lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't stop. The image of those 3 castaways, still out there, still waiting, kept flashing through his thoughts. He couldn't help but think about what it had taken for them to survive this long. Every single day out there must have felt endless. Every night must have brought the same fear. What if no one's coming? They were still holding on. Now it was up to him and the team to make sure help finally arrived. In the middle of the night, Riley woke up from a restless sleep and stepped outside onto the quiet airfield. A light wind rustled the nearby trees and the sky was still heavy with leftover clouds. Off in the distance, he spotted a chopper returning from a late supply run. As it landed, the pilot climbed out slowly, his face drawn and tired. "They're hanging on," the pilot said, voice low, "but just barely. We've got to get them out first thing in the morning." Riley nodded, the urgency hitting him all over again. Every hour they waited was a risk. The island's rough terrain and how weak the castaways were, it all added up to a rescue that had to go perfectly. By the next morning, the skies had cleared enough to move. Riley and the team were back in the air, flying low over the choppy ocean. The wind pushed hard against the helicopter, but Riley stayed steady, hands gripping the controls as they neared Picolot Island. His nerves were sharp. There wasn't much room for error. As they hovered over the beach, the castaways came into view. In the bright morning light, they looked worse than before. Pale skin, sunken eyes, clothes barely holding together. Riley's chest ached when he saw the woman stumble forward. Her steps were slow and shaky, like she was using the last of her energy just to stand. They lowered the winch, sending down a harness. The first man climbed in, his hands trembling so badly he almost missed the straps. As he reached the cabin, the crew pulled him in gently. He was barely able to sit up, breath ragged, his body shaking from exhaustion and relief. Then came the woman. Riley's heart raced as she struggled with the harness. Her coordination was off, and they had to guide her carefully. When she was finally lifted into the air, her body looked so light, it was like she could float away. As soon as she was inside, the medics jumped in, checking her vitals and starting emergency treatment. The last man was the hardest to get up. The winch rocked with the wind, and his body swayed as he held on. When he reached the chopper and collapsed onto the floor, he looked dazed, but a weak smile crossed his face. "Thank you," he whispered. With everyone on board, the helicopter turned toward the coast. Riley stayed near the back, watching as the medics worked fast. The woman was in the worst shape, her breathing shallow, pulse barely there. They gave her glucose right away, trying to stabilize her blood sugar. The 2 men were lying on stretchers, slowly sipping water, starting to come back to life bit by bit. One of the men, his voice rough and barely above a whisper, tried to explain what had happened. "We hit a storm, burned through most of our fuel just trying to stay afloat. After that, we just drifted. We thought it was the end." Riley gave a small nod, his face serious. "You're safe now. We're getting you to a hospital." As the coastline came into view, Riley felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. The worst was behind them. The castaways were about to get the care they so badly needed. The helicopter touched down at the medical center, and a team of doctors and nurses rushed forward, ready to act. Riley helped move the castaways onto stretchers, his eyes pausing on the woman. She was barely conscious, but one of the doctors reassured him. She was stable. "It's a miracle they made it," the doctor said quietly, shaking his head. Over the next few days, the 3 castaways slowly began to recover. Riley checked in on them when he could, hoping to understand more of what they'd been through. Their story came out in small pieces, bits of memory scattered through exhaustion. They had set off from Pulop, heading toward the Pulop Atolls in a 23-foot skiff. When the storm hit, they lost fuel and drifted far off course. Eventually, they washed up on Pyclot Island, over 120 miles from where they'd started. For weeks, they had fought to stay alive. They built a shelter from whatever they could find and survived by catching fish, collecting rainwater, and doing whatever it took to make it one more day. The woman's condition had worsened early on, leaving the two men to take care of her as best they could. Listening to them, Riley felt something deep and quiet settle in his chest. Respect. What they'd endured wasn't just survival. It was grit, heart, and the refusal to give up, even when everything seemed lost. They'd held on to hope, and somehow that had carried them through. The U.S. Border Patrol continued looking into the details of their journey, but to Riley, none of that really mattered. They were people in trouble, and he'd done his job. That was enough. For Riley and his team, this mission would stay with them for a long time. The image of three thin figures waving from a place that was supposed to be empty. That was something you didn't forget. It reminded them all how even the smallest sign could turn into something life-changing. What an amazing story of survival and rescue. Could you imagine being stranded for over a month on a remote island? Think you'd have the strength to keep going? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life rescues, and share it with someone who'd be inspired by it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.